I got to learn, because my wife is a good human being, was open to forgiveness. I was able to start kind of repairing things with her and my kids. And that didn't just happen right away. That was 2 years of intensive marriage family therapy.
So your healing and your families, right, your marriage and family restoration were all intertwined.
Yeah, they were all intertwined, mixed in with this crazy advocacy thing that wasn't ever supposed to happen, right?
Oh, so you became an advocate early on.
Early on, I started it. So back in 2018, when you would get arrested in the Tenderloin neighborhood, SFPD precinct in the Tenderloin would post your mugshot on Twitter. And they stopped doing that when the whole George Floyd stuff happened, right? But prior to that, they were posting mugshots of this person who's been arrested. And my mugshot's still on Twitter right now from 2019, saying Thomas Wolfe continues to be arrested on the 300 block of Golden Gate Avenue. This time he had a bunch of drugs at his feet because I was holding for the dealers, right? And I was early in my recovery when I finished rehab and I was living in the SLE, in the sober living house. I was looking for work, right? And if you Googled my name on Google and put Thomas Wolfe San Francisco, the only thing that was going to come up was that mugshot. And no one's going to hire me. They see that. That's the stigma, right? That's the bad part. But it's also the reality. So instead of trying to get them to delete the mugshot or, whatever, I owned it. And I just went on Twitter and replied saying, hey, I just want everyone to know I'm 8 months clean and sober. Thanks, Salvation Army and SFPD, for helping me turn my life around. And that tweet went viral. And it also went viral on Reddit. And it was the third most viewed Reddit post in the world that day. And I don't know why. I mean, it was wholesome, cool, but for whatever reason, that message took off. And then all of a sudden,
It's beautiful, and the things that should go viral too.
they do. And then all of a sudden, NBC News is knocking on my parents' door looking for me. And Cron 4 is knocking on the door of the rehab looking for me. CNN's calling, wanting to do a segment on me. And all of a sudden, I started to be on local news and national news about my story and my journey into homelessness, from being kind of this regular middle-class guy with a family, falling into addiction and homelessness, and then finding recovery on the other end. And I met the cop that kept arresting me out on the street. They did a whole news segment on that. And
Interesting.
so there was that whole kind of connection with law enforcement.
Did this add pressure, like harder pressure to deal with in your recovery, or?
No, it was more like I was just like gobsmacked by the whole thing. Yeah. It was more kind of like, wow, okay, if you want to know.
Were you still at Salvation Army at the time?
No, I'm already living in the sober living environment at the time. I had completed treatment, and I could have stayed at Salvation Army, but I didn't want to live under that stringent of guidelines anymore. I had done my 6 months, and I was feeling good about myself. But I couldn't go home either. My wife hadn't taken the restraining order off. In fact, if I was going to do that, I had to file a motion myself. She wasn't going to do it. Actions, not words. So I'm the one that filed the motion in the court to remove the restraining order. She showed up to court. The court granted it. Then we started counseling. Immediately thereafter, it wasn't just, okay, you can move home now. It wasn't like that. My daughter did not want to talk to me for a long time. She was mad. And she had every right to be 12, 13 years old. She's mad. She feels betrayed. My son was just more like, what happened to you? Where did you go? Why were you gone for over a year? I was gone for 15 months from their life. Okay, that's a long time for a kid, especially a 9 or 10-year-old kid. And, that's why in recovery, we call it making living amends. Yeah. So now with my kids in my recovery, I make a living amends to that. I suit up and I show up to everything. And I am engaged as a father, and engaged as a husband, and engaged as a teacher for them. And I probably ad nauseum pound recovery into their heads. Not so much my story of addiction, but the tools that I learned in recovery of how to live a life.
That's the redemptive side. So good, and more of that. You learn tools in recovery that if you had, you probably wish you learned them earlier.
Yeah. I wish I could have known him when I was 18. I'm trying to teach my kids now, and my daughter's 18 and my son's 16 now. I try to teach them now.
So break that down. Some of the tools you're trying to teach them that you wish you knew.
So one thing, the biggest thing is to try not to be afraid. Like you're on this planet for such a short period of time. Every minute that you spend in fear is a wasted minute. Okay? Yes, you can't be, that doesn't mean you can be reckless, but you have to be confident in who you are. And you have to be confident that if you have faith, if you believe in things you cannot see and the hope of things to come, that you can have a good life. That if you pursue the things that you like, if you're doing what you like and not giving yourself up to that rationalization that you have to settle on things because you have this responsibility or that responsibility, that leads to misery. But if you just pursue what you like, the cash and prizes will come. They will come in its own way, but it's going to be in the way that you want it to come because you're actually doing what you love. So it's a philosophical difference of how you look at life. Living with gratitude. We talked about that earlier. Grateful for what you have as opposed to what you don't have.
As a teacher, there's scripture in the Bible where Jesus says, "Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and everything else will follow."
Right.
It's like if we can, and I like breaking that down into just English, just a life principle. If you seek something higher, this vision, it's this core faith that, the world, things will work out.
Yeah, things will work.
We're going to have that higher when you have a compelling purpose in life, everything else follows. Where if you try to pursue and you're living under this fear and insecurity,
and it's like the fear is the biggest thing that you learn to let go of in recovery. Does that mean that things don't happen that scare me? Yeah, sure. Like I'm afraid of nuclear war. Nobody wants that to happen, right? But your day-to-day life of like, what's going to happen to me when I get out of bed today and go to work? I'm not worried about that anymore. I used to be worried about that. I used to wake up with a pit in my stomach every day for years and years and years. How am I going to worry about paying this bill? How am I going to worry about, are we going to have enough money for my kids' preschool? Are we going to have...
Your faith journey, were you from a Christian at all background, or that all happened in recovery?
So I came from a Catholic background, but we weren't hardcore practicing. We were the 2-time-a-year Catholics, Easter and Christmas, like that. Cross hanging in our house, but it wasn't like big religious stuff. And if you know anything about the Catholic faith, it's big on I don't know, like I'm not trying to be down on the Catholic faith, but it's big on like punishing yourself, and I'm not down with that.
Well, both Catholicism, Protestantism, Judaism, whatever, name the ism, at least those, Islam, those are very, very diverse things. They're quite different.
Right.
We were just part of the Archdiocese Restorative Justice Conference.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So
Oh, powerful. So, it is what it is, certainly there's those streams of toxicity and the streams of pure gold.
I think I should add as a caveat to that statement that I just made is that it's also all about interpretation. How you as a human being decide to interpret what information is being provided to you. So when I read the Bible, when I read the New Testament, or even the Old Testament, I read the Bible, I don't interpret it literally, but some people do. I look at it as these are stories that you can glean a lesson from that serve as a guide on how to live your life. And that's how I present it to my kids. And that's what's helped them, and that's what helps me kind of walk through life. So I'm not a huge organized religion guy, but I'm full of faith. I believe in God. I love, Jesus saved me. I recognize that, and I respect that. And so I respect all faiths because believing in it, as long as you have, I think you're better off as a human being if you have that belief in the power greater.
I was laughing when you said you're not a big organized religion guy. A friend of mine lives up in, he's still up there in Marin County. He had a small church, and he said, man, those people that don't like organized religion, I said, come join us. You'll love us. We are so disorganized. I love that. I love that drip.
But at the same time, I love religious organizations like the Salvation Army, who they're a church, but they also cared enough to take me in when nobody else would. And so they get props for that, because I promise you, nobody else would take me. I had no money, nobody was going to help me, and I was in jail. And who was going to take me? The Salvation Army. So they get props. And that's why.
Congratulations, Salvation Army.
Yeah, and that's why I try to give back and help them with their homeless programs.
It's great work. And a lot of people don't know the Salvation Army is a core native San Franciscan story. The whole kettlebell that came out of San Francisco. They've been here like
150 years?
Yeah.
Something like that. Salvation Army, ironically, invented drug rehab. They invented it. The whole idea of going down and detoxing and going through a program, they were doing that before Bill and Bob.
So many things. I mean, the whole bands outside on the streets, they like invented that. They were on the cutting edge of women empowerment too, because it was founded by the founder and his wife together. And they were it was controversial too, because she'd get up and speak and he'd support her, sure.
Right, and now they have women ministers and women and men ministering, and they're in 120 countries. And I'm not trying to do a big plug for them. I'm just trying to say that, look,
I am.
There are organizations out there that really do help people where nobody else will, and they're trying to make some moves in San Francisco to change the discourse in San Francisco around what's happening on our streets and with the drug crisis and homelessness. And I don't, what's difficult is that the issue of homelessness and drugs has become politicized, right?
Well, let's move into that. I love your backstory, but now you're an advocate with lots of experience, smart guy, and also lived experience. So what are you advocating for? What are the policies that break down what's happening now and how it needs to change?
Right.
First, can we solve this problem?
Yes, the problem is solvable, but right now, the position that we're in as a city, as a state, maybe even as a country, the best we can do right now is manage the problem until we have a significant shift in how we look at the actual problem of homelessness and drug addiction and the underlying causes behind that are churning out 4 new homeless people for every 1 homeless person that gets off the street. Like, we need to stop that churn. It's happening right now.
Ask me about that later, but you talk first.
The first and foremost, I advocate for recovery. It means finding a new way to live your life. Struggling with addiction right now, if you really give recovery an honest try, that means that you as the individual are also willing to do the work. I advocate for that, but I also advocate for the community, the local government, state government, federal government to do their part to help provide the resources that are necessary to help those individuals succeed, right? So San Francisco right now, for example, they have about 5,000 people a year going into drug treatment in San Francisco. Most of that is paid for through the state, Medi-Cal, right? In San Francisco right now, only 12% of those 5,000 actually complete the drug program. That means 88% fail. That means 88% continue to use drugs and go back out onto the street. And the state is spending hundreds of millions of dollars just for San Francisco to pay for that treatment that 88% of people fail at doing, right? At the same time that that's happening, you have a lack of affordable housing across the state, across the Western United States. So people that used to be able to get by living in an SRO, you can't anymore. Or living in a studio or an in-law, you can't afford it anymore. And you end up, if you're on a fixed income, especially SSI, things like that, you can't afford it anymore. And so you end up living in your car or on the street, right? And when you're in a car on the street, hey, I was on the street. Why wouldn't you self-medicate? Because your life is looking pretty damn bleak at that point.
Yeah.
You're sleeping rough on a cement. You're going to want to use some dope to help them that, right? So I advocate for changes in that space too. So obviously we need to build more housing in a city like San Francisco, even the expensive stuff, because as the more you build, the more people move up that ladder and more the housing opens up at the bottom, right? For people that can't afford it, that can't afford what's there right now. I think the average cost for a 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco is back up over $3,000 a month right now.
We got to reform the way we build too. Do you know that low-income housing in San Francisco, like the way we build it through the tax credits and all that, it actually costs more than market rate housing to actually build. And it's about $1 million a bed plus.
That's right.
I mean, someone's got to pay for that. That's not a sustainable solution.
Yeah.
Got to.
They built in Skid Row in LA, great example. They built 2 towers, brand new, to house like about 600, 700 people. It cost, they said they did it at a discount. The discount was $600,000 per unit. That was the discounted rate, right? And the irony is that the units of this social housing or affordable housing is literally on Skid Row in the same spot where everybody's shooting dope. So if you're a person in recovery like me and you need housing and you 6 months before or a year before you're shooting dope on Skid Row, and then they on 6th Street and Skid Row in LA, and then they drop you in that apartment and you look out your window and there's your homie down there with his fentanyl, how do you think that's going to work? Like, we need to rethink that whole thing. So I advocate for that side of the
We need systemic reform.
Correct. And then I advocate for changes in drug policy. I've gotten very involved.
Wasn't just the drug policies. Would name one policy that should change?
Aspects of harm reduction, specifically the distribution of clean equipment for drug use. I support syringe exchange programs, but an actual exchange program, right? San Francisco gave out over 1 million needles last year. There's not 1 million, even with the 25,000 drug users in San Francisco, using 1 million needles is a lot. And only 40% of them got picked up. The rest of them went into people's private garbages or went into the bay, right? That's a problem. So I'm cool with syringe exchange because it stops the spread of HIV and Hep C. Down with that. Passing out foil pipes and crack pipes, meth pipes and straws, that's enabling. As a drug user on the street, I used to have to hustle up $3 to go to the smoke shop and buy my glass rod so that I could smoke my crack or smoke meth. Now, the state pays for it. The state provides block grants to the city of San Francisco to actually distribute harm reduction supplies, and those contracts go to nonprofits, like the San Francisco AIDS Foundation is an example, that then farms out smaller grants to different groups that disseminate all of this product on the street. And so now you have people with wagons coming down the street of the Tenderloin. Here's 5 free crack pipes for you. And here's a Brillo for your screen for your crack pipe. Here's a clean rig too. Oh, and here's some condoms, by the way. And then you ask them, hey, I'm interested in going to treatment today. Do you have any information on that? No, we don't do that. And then you just keep moving on. That all has to stop now. And I think it's gonna, because the mayor has talked about
that's stopping was elected on, right? He's out there.
And he announced that eventually they're going to take a step back from that. And I've written some articles on that that are going to get published pretty soon. And I have very strong feelings about that. The whole notion of voluntary treatment versus mandated treatment. The harm reduction folks in drug policy will argue very hard against mandated treatment. Drug courts being given a choice of being forced into treatment. The data shows, I'll just share you, the data shows, studies show that completion rates between voluntary treatment and mandated treatment are exactly the same.
We always fight over the wrong things. What hicks me up is my wife's Portuguese. I grew up in Portugal. We have this case study where they dramatically address the heroin crisis, and yet we cite them. There are great, and then we come to exact opposite conclusions, and we fight over mandatory, non-mandatory, where we just let people fall through the gaps.
Right.
Okay, so people go to prison.
Right.
They're in jail. Okay, that's already happening. They're sober when they're physically. They get over the physical addiction. Okay, a lot of them make decisions to turn their lives around. I know that because my niece lived this. Okay, when they get out of prison, now is the time. That's when they're vulnerable. And if we get them in, we do a warm handoff, we get them immediately into a good, stable place where, it's a positive environment, they'll go one way. But yet it is so hard. No one's talking to each other. It's so hard to make that transition. We just basically throw them out there and hope.
So we talk about Portugal, right? And a lot of misinformation gets reported about drug policy in Portugal. Did they decriminalize drug possession in 2001? Yeah,
But they did not legalize all drugs.
they
Totally different.
totally baloney, right?
Yeah.
And you get brought before the Dissuasion Commission, which is an administrative court that's there with a magistrate and a social worker, and sometimes your family member to urge you and sometimes shame you into going to treatment.
Exactly. And they're deeply conservative culture. They definitely did not do anything to remove the social stigma of drug use.
And you said that perfectly. It's the cultural difference is that this country, we celebrate drug use. We've been celebrating drug use in music and in television since before the 1980s, right? And while, hey, some recreational drug use, I'm cool with that. But this whole, it's not recreational now, And the thing is that like when, you're a child of the 80s, when you tried a drug back then, you knew it wasn't going to be tainted with fentanyl. It was just, now 60 to 80% of all the drugs that you purchase on Snapchat, on other social media platforms, are contaminated with illicit fentanyl. So if you're buying Xanax off of social media, there's an 80% chance it has fentanyl in it when you buy it. No such thing as experimenting anymore. So we need to raise awareness around that. The other harm reduction stuff that I have an issue with is, look, I safe supply programs, what they do in Canada, it's insane to me. Where as an alternative to using fentanyl, your doctor will give you a prescription number that you can then take to a vending machine. You type in the number, and then it spits out a bunch of dilaudid pills for you to take as an alternative to fentanyl. You know what they do with that medicine? They sell it on the street to get cash to go buy fentanyl because it's not as strong as fentanyl. And if you're anyone that knows that's in recovery from addiction or that's using currently right now will tell you they always want the strongest stuff. They would post bills, right, on like posts in the Tenderloin when I was out there that said, hey, there's a really strong batch of heroin going around. Be careful. Don't use alone. Only use a little bit. I'll be like, cool. Who's the dealer that has that strong stuff? Let me go find him. And me and my homies will go around the corner and go find the guy and buy that really strong heroin because we wanted to get that big high. That's the kind of insanity of where harm reduction has become too permissive and gone too far.
Schellenberger, he kind of...
Yeah, well, so I was in his book, San Francisco. He's a friend of mine. We don't agree on everything, but we agree on the drug and homeless crisis because he's right. We need to focus on sheltering people first and getting them housed, putting them on a pathway to recovery as part of that.
Him outlining what's happening, I thought he just did an excellent job with that.
He did a great job, and he was on the money, and that was a big catalyst for a lot of the change that you're seeing in San Francisco, though none of these politicians will admit it publicly. They all read the book. They know because he pulled from all these people in recovery on the street, and I was one of them.
I was that's a different subject. To me, when I read it, it was more of a confessional, and it was an insider critique. And he wasn't writing it as a far right-wing guy. He was writing it as a progressive with the good part of progressive values of wanting to help people. And I don't know if he uses this term. This is a term my wife and I use, which is toxic mercy. It's when you show mercy, but it's really just enablement and codependency, and there's no true love there. You're not helping anybody. There's no human dignity.
Well, like me and others, like Dr. Keith Humphreys, have said that San Francisco, the West Coast of the United States, we're talking Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, has this very progressive policy that's really dedicated to harm reduction within its drug policy. But there's also this weird libertarian streak going through it, which is focused on body autonomy and people making their own choices. The director of behavioral health yesterday was caught on tape, and it was all over social media for San Francisco, saying that public drug use is only other people's problems, not the individual. who's actually using, then I'm just sitting here like my head is exploding as a former intravenous drug user on the street. Of course it's my problem too.
Yeah, that's one of the things I want to do with the whole Innovat podcast, is interview the subject matter experts, and you should be able to tell your own story, Yeah. Anyways. Well, thank you so much. Oh, this is on a hopeful note.
Yeah, well, I think San Francisco's turning a corner.
I am actually very optimistic. I believe I have a growth mentality, and I believe, you said something about it's a cultural thing. Well, the flip side of it actually gives me hope. It's like, I don't have an addiction. I have a deeply addictive personality that I've come, so I can relate in the sense of, but by the grace of God, there go I. But, my path has been different. Okay. But I still face the problem. I still have to go park in those areas of San Francisco. You have to walk. I have to watch it. I mean, we had a homeless lady. I am in San Jose. Where we live, this isn't, happening, but it's encroaching there. We had a homeless come knock on our door last night. And, when you say it's a cultural issue, now that's actually understanding we all can own it, which means we can all be part of the solution. We all need to. And we need to have this rock bottom, face the truth moment. And I feel that this crisis could be that, where we embrace it as a society and we decide who we're going to be in the future. Right? We don't have to be Texas. We don't have to be anyone else, but we have to face our own issues. And I believe we together can solve them and create something beautiful that inspires the whole world. That's what I'm working for.
Well, if I could just add one thing too, is that, look, we need every resource to bear on this, right? And so drug policy and homeless policy, the way it's implemented, the systems that they use are very clandestine, kind of old school. So I think that innovation,
We got to bring transparency to that.
yeah, bringing real objective data
Yeah.
to the problem will help, because right now so much of it is rooted in emotion rather than actual fact. Dogma. That's why it's like people are writing, publishing peer-reviewed papers in medical journals that say, oh, actually, when you arrest drug dealers on the street, overdoses increase in that area afterwards. And then you go and read who wrote that actual paper, and it's two people who have been advocating for safe injection sites, decriminalization and legalization of drugs for the last decade, even though they have letters after their name. That doesn't mean that they're not subjective.
Review process is breaking down. The peers need to go review that, and
So it's really hard in drug policy and homeless policy to actually just get to the root of it. So, if Web3, if anybody's doing anything that they
I'll tell you if someone is doing something really, really exciting that I want you to help me on this. So we need to raise the awareness of this. It's one thing to understand the problem framing, okay, and then how we view it, and how you view the problem is the problem. Anyways, my friend Adrian Tirtanati, do you know him? Open Door Legal.
maybe sounds familiar.
In the U.S., we provide universal access to legal aid for criminal law, so you're guaranteed a lawyer, but not the case of civil law. And we're the only developed rich country that doesn't do it that way. As a result of that, the poor and civil law is the vast majority of law. Domestic violence, unlawful foreclosure, wage theft. And as a result of not providing representation, the poor are deeply exploited. He is pioneering in San Francisco our nation's first system of universal access to legal aid for civil law for the poor. They started in the Bayview Hunters Point district, and they just did a study, a true academically rigorous study, using advanced stats and statistical analysis to show that their intervention over 10 years in the Bayview Hunters Point was causal to a 49% reduction in homelessness in the Bayview-Hunters Point district from 2013 to 2023, while it went up in the rest of the city. And then they project forward using the same, this is a map that, like, it's the same way Vegas sets odds, okay, and they'll bet on it. That in 4 years, that if you implement their intervention of providing universal access to legal aid, you'll decrease homelessness by 40%. And it is citywide. And this is the biggest bang for your buck it's money ball for social impact, for social services. It's the biggest impact as far as it's far cheaper than law enforcement, than services. It's like what you said. If four more people are becoming homeless for every one we get out, we're never going to solve the issue. But if we can put a guardrail up there and lower that rate of what's driving it, and it turns out that legal aid is, and in access to legal aid is a big open door that allows the poor to be exploited and drives homelessness.
What's interesting about that is that, there's a whole debate that continues to rage around eviction protections, et cetera. And I have mixed feelings about that, but I think that in general, there is a higher percentage of people that are people of color, people in depressed communities. They're subjected to more pressure around evictions than other folks. That's one factor. And then there's also a new wage theft is a huge problem, and that's been continuing. What's unfortunate about wage theft is that it gets used as a whataboutism, right? Which really pisses me off, frankly, because Walgreens keeps getting in trouble for wage theft, as an example, right? They've been in trouble for wage theft in the past as a corporation. Yet when people come into Walgreens and loot their store and steal all the cosmetics and everything to go sell them on the street, and someone says, hey, those people need to be held accountable, then here comes the decriminalization folks and say, yeah, but what about the wage theft that Walgreens is doing? And we're like, hey, what is
a different issue? Well, this is the problem. We love to fight. That's how the fight is American.
And I was just kind of like, well, they're both bad, but that one doesn't excuse the other. And it's kind of like the whole thing with criminal justice reform, right? Do people of color get unduly affected by crime and by accountability and prison sentences and all that? Yes. Why is that? Because those communities are underfunded and depressed, and we as a society and a country, because of our history of systemic racism, are not investing enough in those communities and those people, especially around education, to get those things turned around, to get those communities turned around and give people an equal opportunity as everyone else has. But the answer to that isn't letting someone who's a person of color out of prison after they committed murder without the help, without the resources. So the criminal justice reform isn't supposed to be about reducing sentences and letting people out. They totally screwed that up, which is why things like Proposition 36 happened in California, which I was part of the leadership group to get it passed. It's not because of that. It's because the criminal justice reform was supposed to happen on the resource side of building out the infrastructure to support people who are being released from prison early, so they had an opportunity to be successful. And that never happened.
Well, if there's anything American about us is we love to fight. But here's the note I want to end on. I've been on some very, very good teams. Good teams love to fight. And in practice, we would fight like crazy. The thing is that it switches, though. Once you go, because the practices are harder than the games, and your depth and your commitment to one another are so much deeper than your fighting. Your fighting is making each other better. And then when you go out and you play the other team, you're together. You've gotten that all out, and you know. And that's my dream for America. If we could tap into this healthy skepticism, if we can become our, critics, and we can listen to the other side, stop talking across from each other, but then understand that we're one people and have that sense of depth and listen, it will go from toxic division to healthy competition amongst ourselves, and then we could create the better world that we're all dreaming of.
Sign me up, Ted.
All right. Well, thank you so much. By the way, this will be the first of many. Thank you so much for joining me. This was a real hit. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for listening to us.